Saturday morning, just after 10 a.m., Terren Hall adjusted the brim of his baseball cap in the rearview mirror. The man staring back at him was barely recognizable, not the CEO who had built a multi-million-dollar retail empire, but just another face in the crowd. His plain hoodie and jeans were a far cry from the tailored suits that normally defined his days. But today wasn't about boardrooms or spreadsheets. Today was about stepping into his own world, unannounced, to see what it looked like through a stranger's eyes. He had always believed in the power of connection. His company was founded on the promise that every customer mattered, no matter their background. But lately, he had heard whispers, complaints about certain stores treating people differently, especially people who looked like him, employees being dismissive, shoppers being watched a little too closely. And this store? This one was different. The retail location just outside Dallas had sentimental value. It was the first one he had opened outside his home state, the first big risk he had taken. He had poured himself into it. Now he needed to know if the values he built his company on still held weight, or if they had been lost. Terren parked his car, taking a deep breath. His stomach tightened with anticipation. He had given up a lot to get here, late nights, early mornings. The doubters who had told him that a black man from the South had no business trying to build a retail empire. But he had proved them wrong. The question was, had his own people proved him wrong? He stepped out of the car and into the bustling parking lot. The sun was already high, casting sharp reflections off windshields. He adjusted the strap of the weathered canvas bag slung over his shoulder, an everyday shopper. No special treatment, no second glances. That was the plan. The storefront gleamed under the sunlight, the logo bold and familiar. His creation, his vision. He had been here countless times in the early days. But now, years later, he wondered, would they treat him the same if they didn't know who he was? As he crossed the threshold, the automatic doors slid open, a rush of cool air greeting him. The store was alive with activity, shoppers pushing carts, kids pleading for toys, employees stocking shelves. From a distance, everything looked smooth, but he wasn't here for the surface. He was here to dig deeper. Terren wandered toward the electronics section, hands in his pockets, his eyes scanning the layout. He reached for a pair of wireless headphones on the display, turning them over in his hands. A simple test. Would someone approach him? Offer assistance? Smile? Nothing. A young employee, a white man in his early 20s, stood behind the counter. He was scrolling through his phone, half paying attention to the world around him. A few feet away, a white couple approached the display, looking at a new speaker system. The employee glanced up immediately, straightened his posture, and walked over to assist them. Terren watched. "Hey there, how can I help you folks today?" The employee greeted the couple with an easy smile. The woman smiled back. "We're looking for something with good bass." "I've got just the thing," he said, launching into a smooth sales pitch, pulling out a speaker from behind the counter. Terren cleared his throat. The employee didn't even glance his way. He waited. Still nothing. So this was how it was. After a moment, Terren finally spoke up. "Excuse me." The employee barely flicked his eyes toward him, his expression unreadable. "Yeah?" Terren held up the headphones. "Do these have noise cancellation?" The employee exhaled as if he had just been interrupted. "Yeah, they do," he said flatly. Then silence. Nothing else. No offer to explain the features, no attempt at customer service, no enthusiasm. Terren nodded slowly, setting the box down. "Okay, thanks." The employee was already back to his phone. A tightness formed in Terren's chest, but he kept his expression neutral. He wandered through the aisles, observing interactions. The pattern repeated. Some customers got warm greetings, others got cold indifference, and people who looked like him, they got something else entirely. Then, just as he was about to leave, something happened. A middle-aged black woman, well-dressed with a confident air, was browsing the beauty aisle. An older white manager, a woman with short blonde hair and a crisp button-down, approached her. Terren couldn't hear what was said, but he saw the black woman's expression shift. She stiffened. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. Then she turned and walked out. Terren's heart pounded. The manager watched the woman leave, her lips pressed in a thin line. Then she turned, and her eyes landed on Terren. For the first time since entering the store, someone really noticed him, and just like that, the test wasn't over. It was just getting started. Terren locked eyes with the store manager, and in that instant, he saw it. The calculation, the quiet judgment, the decision being made about him before a single word was exchanged. She adjusted the name tag pinned to her blouse. Susan Harper, store manager. Her expression was polite but stiff as she strode toward him, the practiced authority of someone used to being in control. "Can I help you with something?" she asked, her tone clipped. Terren forced an easy smile. "Just browsing." Susan's gaze flicked over him, lingering on his hoodie, his jeans, the canvas bag slung over his shoulder. "We get a lot of browsers in here," she said. "If you're looking for something specific, I can direct you." There it was. Not a welcome or let me know if you need help, but a subtle push, a warning disguised as customer service. Terren tilted his head slightly. "I'm good, thanks." Susan didn't move. "You've been walking around for a while," she said, crossing her arms. "Is there something in particular you're looking for?" Terren exhaled slowly, keeping his posture relaxed. "I just had a question about the headphones, but I got my answer." She nodded, but didn't leave. "If you need anything else, let me know," she said. But the words felt hollow, performative. She lingered a second too long before finally walking away, her heels clicking against the tile. Terren watched her disappear behind the customer service counter. A deep, simmering irritation settled in his chest, but he pushed it down. This was why he was here, to see it for himself. He turned back toward the front of the store, weaving through the aisles, when he caught movement in his peripheral vision. Susan wasn't finished with him. From behind the counter, she was speaking to someone. Another employee, a younger man with a shaved head and a red store vest. She nodded in Terren's direction. The employee's gaze followed hers, then snapped back as he nodded. Terren's jaw tightened. A minute later, as he neared the entrance, the young man appeared beside him. "Hey, sir," the employee said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I just wanted to check. Do you need any assistance?" It was different this time. Not the helpful kind of customer service, the kind meant to let you know you were being watched. Terren's blood ran hot. He let a pause stretch between them, then turned his head slowly. "No," he said, his voice even, "but thanks for asking." The employee hesitated, then took a step back, muttering, "All right, just making sure." Terren didn't move right away. He inhaled, exhaled, measured his next step carefully. He had spent his whole career navigating these moments, understanding when to speak and when to watch, when to confront and when to let the moment build. And right now, the moment was building. He turned toward the exit, but before he could take another step, a new voice rang out behind him. "Excuse me, sir?" He already knew who it was. Terren turned slowly, finding Susan standing with her hands on her hips, her expression sharp. "I need to ask you a few questions." He kept his face neutral. "About what?" Susan's gaze flickered toward his bag. "We had a report about a possible issue in the electronics section," she said smoothly. "Just a precaution. Would you mind stepping to the side with me for a moment?" A report? He had barely spoken to anyone. Terren almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. He studied her, noting the carefully chosen words. She wasn't accusing him outright. She was suggesting something, just enough to justify pulling him aside, just enough to make it clear what she thought of him. Silence stretched between them. Terren had a choice to make. He could play along, let the moment pass, and walk out. He could stay quiet and come back later, in a suit and tie, with a boardroom full of executives behind him, and let Susan crumble under the realization of who she had just profiled. Or he could make this lesson hit now. Terren exhaled through his nose, then smiled, slow, deliberate. "You want to see my bag?" he asked casually. Susan hesitated. "Well, He lifted the strap from his shoulder, unzipped the canvas tote, and turned it upside down. A leather notebook, a Mont Blanc pen, and a bottle of water tumbled onto the floor. A few customers turned to watch. Susan's face flinched just slightly, surprise flickering in her eyes before she masked it. "I assume that clears up any issues?" Terren said smoothly, arching a brow. Susan's jaw tightened. "There was no accusation, sir. Just a precaution." Terren chuckled, low and knowing. "Right," he said. He bent down, picking up his things slowly, taking his time, letting the weight of the moment stretch. Then he straightened, adjusted his bag, and leveled her with a look. "Tell me, Susan," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Would you have done the same thing if I walked in here wearing a suit?" She didn't answer right away. Her mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. And in that pause, in that single moment, he had his answer. Terren's smile widened just a fraction. "Have a good day," he said, turning toward the door. This test wasn't over, not yet. But the lesson, it had already begun. Terren stepped into the parking lot, the store's automatic doors sliding shut behind him. The Texas heat hit him like a wall, but the fire burning inside his chest was hotter. He had played along, let the moment stretch, let Susan reveal exactly who she was without realizing it. And now it was time to end the game. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts, tapping the name of Andre Vasquez, his regional director. The phone barely rang twice before Andre picked up. "Boss," he greeted, voice calm and professional. "Everything all right?" "Meet me at the Dallas store," Terren said, his voice measured but firm. "Now." Andre, never one to waste time with questions when Terren used that tone, simply replied, "On my way." Terren ended the call and inhaled deeply, centering himself. He could feel the eyes from inside the store, curious employees glancing through the glass windows, whispering to each other. Susan was still at the customer service desk, likely watching him, likely thinking she had won, but she had no idea what was coming. Terren took his time. He walked back to his car, leaning against the hood as he scrolled through emails, waiting. 10 minutes later, a sleek black sedan pulled up. Andre stepped out, dressed in a navy blue polo and slacks, corporate but not too flashy. His sharp eyes scanned the parking lot before locking onto Terren. "You want to tell me why I just left my Saturday brunch for this?" Andre asked, stepping closer. "You sounded—" He trailed off, getting a better look at Terren's face. Terren smirked. "What do I sound like?" "Like you're about to fire somebody." Terren chuckled, shaking his head. "Not yet." He gestured toward the store. "But I need you to watch something first." Andre followed his gaze, frowning slightly. "All right. What are we walking into?" Terren pushed off the car. "An education." They entered the store together, and this time heads really turned. Employees stiffened. Some whispered to each other, probably wondering why the regional director had just walked in with a man they had dismissed moments ago. And Susan? The moment she spotted Andre, her face changed. Terren saw it, the way her spine straightened, the way her lips pressed into a quick, thin smile. Recognition. Authority had entered the building. She smoothed her blazer and hurried toward them. "Mr. Vasquez," she greeted, her voice all business. "This is unexpected. Is there something I can help you with?" Andre nodded toward Terren. "You can start by greeting the man who owns this building." The color drained from Susan's face. Terren took a slow step forward, his expression unreadable. "Go ahead, Susan," he said, voice calm. "Introduce yourself properly this time." Her lips parted, but no sound came out at first. Then, finally, "Mr. Hall," she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. The shift in the store was instant. Employees who had ignored him were now suddenly present, alert, standing straighter. The young worker who had approached him earlier looked like he wanted to disappear. Terren let the silence hang, let the weight of the moment settle before he spoke again. "Let me ask you something, Susan," he said. "When I walked in here earlier, did you see a customer? Or did you see something else?" Susan's throat bobbed in a hard swallow. Because I saw it," Terren continued, stepping even closer. "I saw it when you barely looked at me before deciding I needed to be redirected. I saw it when I watched you walk right past me to greet someone else. And I definitely saw it when you had an employee follow me through the store." Susan flinched. "That wasn't—" "It was exactly what I think it was," Terren cut in, his tone sharper now. And the worst part? I'm not the only one it's happened to, am I? Her silence was the only answer he needed. Terren exhaled, shaking his head. This store, my store, was built on inclusivity. Every customer matters. But you, he gestured around, you've turned it into something else. Susan's face was pale now. Mr. Hall, I assure you that was never my intention. But it was your impact, he replied coolly. And that's what matters. Andre cleared his throat. Terren, what do you want to do here? Terren looked around. The employees, the ones who had stood by, silent, the ones who had watched the profiling happen, who had likely seen it before and said nothing. He had built something bigger than this, bigger than people like Susan. But if he let it slide, if he walked out and let her stay, then what kind of leader was he? He looked back at Susan. Hand over your badge. Her eyes widened. Sir, you're done here, Terren said flatly. This isn't a warning. It's a decision. One you made the moment you looked at me and decided I didn't belong in my own damn store. Silence stretched. Then, with trembling hands, Susan unclipped her name badge and placed it in his outstretched palm. Terren closed his fingers around it. Then he turned to the rest of the employees, his voice steady but firm. If anyone else in this building thinks the way Susan does, if anyone else believes some customers deserve different treatment because of how they look, you should go ahead and leave now. No one moved. Good, Terren said, slipping the badge into his pocket. Because change is coming, starting today. And with that, he turned and walked toward the exit, Andre falling into step beside him. As they stepped back into the Texas heat, Andre let out a low whistle. Damn, I'd hate to be her right now. Terren exhaled, letting the tension finally drain from his body. Yeah, he muttered, but I'd hate even more to be the kind of leader who lets people like her run my stores. Andre nodded, thoughtful. Then, after a moment, You hungry? 'Cause that was a fire speech, and I feel like you deserve pancakes. Terren laughed for the first time all day. Yeah, he said, shaking his head. I could eat. As they walked toward their cars, Terren glanced back at the store one last time. This was his empire, his legacy, and today he had taken it back. Monday morning came fast. The Dallas store sat under a cloudy sky, the air thick with the promise of rain. Inside, the employees moved with unusual energy. Whispers in the break room, cautious glances across the floor. Everyone had heard about what happened on Saturday. Susan Harper was gone. The woman who once ruled the store with cold efficiency had packed up her desk and left, her departure quiet, but seismic. Her absence left a vacuum, one that employees weren't sure how to fill. By noon, the weight of the unknown pressed down on them. Then, Terren Hall walked through the front doors. This time there was no hoodie, no disguise. He wore a sharp-tailored suit, the picture of the man who had built the company from nothing. His presence sent a ripple through the store. Shock, nerves, the unspoken question. What happens now? Terren took his time, strolling through the aisles, observing. Today there were no assumptions, no lingering stares, no managers whispering behind counters. Employees suddenly found their best customer service voices. But he wasn't here for a performance. He was here for change. He stopped near the registers, where a group of employees gathered in anxious silence. All eyes were on him. He could see the tension, the weight of uncertainty hanging over them. Terren exhaled, then spoke. I bet some of you are wondering why I'm here. His voice was calm but firm, filling the space. Let's clear that up. He scanned their faces, letting the moment settle. What happened in this store on Saturday wasn't just about me. It was about the culture of this place. And if any of you think Susan was the only problem, let me stop you right there. He let his words hang in the air. She was a symptom, but the problem runs deeper. A few employees shifted uncomfortably. Others lowered their eyes. Some of you stood by and watched customers get treated differently, Terren continued. You saw it happen, and you said nothing. Maybe because you were scared. Maybe because you thought it wasn't your business. But let me make something very clear. If you work for me, it is your business. Silence. Then, finally, a young black cashier near the front, her name tag read Maya, spoke up, her voice hesitant but strong. "Mr. Hall," she said, "can I ask you something?" Terren turned to her. Of course. She swallowed hard. "People like Susan, they make it hard to speak up. I know I should have said something, but—" She hesitated, then finished. "What happens to us if we do? If the next Susan comes along?" Terren studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "That's fair." He took a step closer, making sure they all heard him clearly. "That's why I'm putting something in place today," he said. "Every employee in this store will go through new training. Not the generic kind, the real kind. The kind that teaches you to recognize bias before it turns into discrimination. And more than that, I'm setting up an anonymous reporting system. You see something wrong, you say something, without fear." Maya exhaled in quiet relief. A few others nodded, exchanging glances. Terren continued, his voice unwavering. "This store is going to be what it was always meant to be, a place where everyone belongs. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because we make it happen." The weight in the room shifted. Employees straightened. The nervous energy that had filled the air was replaced with something else, something stronger. Hope. Terren clapped his hands together. "All right," he said, a small smile creeping onto his face. "Now let's get back to work." The crowd dispersed, and as Terren made his way toward the exit, Andre, who had been standing near the back, arms crossed, shook his head with a smirk. "You really do love a good speech, huh?" Terren chuckled. "What can I say? Sometimes people just need to hear it." Andre nodded toward the store. "You think they'll actually change?" Terren exhaled, looking around. The employees moved with new energy. A shift was happening. "It's not just about them," he said finally. "It's about all of us." Then, with one last glance at the store he had reclaimed, he stepped out into the world, knowing one thing for sure: change had already begun,